Snow is a two-sided devil. In one scene, its billowy white sheets set a picturesque winter wonderland. It's the fluff Hallmark movies are made of. Then there's New York City, an expectation and a reality. When snow coats the city streets, it's really a sight to see. Dirty black snow, New Yorkers skating on sheets of ice, and muddy subway stations. Thank you TikTok, Instagram, and my childhood friend Luis Rivera for sharing this nugget of pure gold. Much like the snow, the expectation of outgrowing teenage habits can sometimes get messy. Those who faced the dilemma of expectation and reality know when it comes to habitual behaviors, breaking these patterns is like shoveling your car out of a 5-foot snowstorm. Hard and nearly impossible. There's a reason they say addiction is a family disease. One person may use, but the whole family suffers. One person's paradise is another's nightmare.
Oh, we are all looking for adventure. We are all looking for adventure. We are all looking for adventure.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. You're tuning in to And That's Okay. I am your host, Paulina Butska, and today we are joined with the wonderful Rachel Falgout. Rachel, we met through Katie Porsche, who is also on this episode. Well, not on this episode, but on the podcast, I should say. And she said, you have to meet my friend Rachel. We have a great story that you kind of have of overcoming. Today's episode, in your own words, when we had a great conversation on the phone a few weeks back, you said, I'm a mess. And you're not a mess anymore. But that's what we're calling today's episode. We're going to go from I'm a mess and that's okay. And then we're going to bring it full circle for everybody as to how you kind of cleaned yourself up in the process.
Yeah, that's actually a great starting point. And so the title of this is perfect for me because I always share that, like, I am a hot mess and I really am okay. And I'm okay sometimes with not being okay because I'm not perfect. You know, I'm always going to be this work in progress. But where I kind of landed about 4.5, almost 5 years ago was in rehab. And I was continuously just drinking myself into an oblivion where I was mixing alcohol and pills. And I wasn't trying to kill myself. But at the end of the day, if I never woke up again, I probably would have been okay with that too, because I was miserable, delusional, frustrated, angry, and mad at the world, and was continuously spiraling out of control. And it was one of many toxic relationships that I had been in where I just drank one night and was frustrated and took a handful of sleeping pills, Xanax, as well as my Adderall, which is a definite no-no when it comes to drinking. You shouldn't be mixing any type of pills at all with that. And I just couldn't sleep. And so I kept taking a handful of it and couldn't sleep and taking more and more and more. And before I even realized it, it was 11 o'clock the next day. I was completely wired. I still felt extremely drunk. And I had gone to see my niece perform in the Nutcracker. And my sister was sitting next to me and I'm bawling my eyes out. And she looked at me like I was absurd because my niece was a little mouse. I don't know if you're very familiar with the Nutcracker. And she was just like, Rachel, like, it's going to be okay. She had no clue what was going on. She was like, she's just a little mouse. And I looked at her and I grabbed her hand and I said, you need to take me to rehab immediately. Because if I don't stop, I'm never going to see her graduate from high school. Whew, just thinking about it just brings tears to my eyes. I'll never see her go to prom. I'll never see her get married or anything like that. And she is absolutely my heart. And it was crushing me in that moment. And so I said, I need to go and get some help because I'm desperate. And if I don't, I'm not going to wake up one day. And so I ended up going to rehab. And it was funny because I shared this post yesterday that I was doing this podcast with you on Facebook, and I got so many overwhelming words of encouragement and prayers. And one of the girls from rehab actually sent me a message and said, Rachel, I'm so proud of you, how you've come so far. She says, I remember when you were in rehab and you were like, I don't think I'm an alcoholic. I don't think I have a problem. I just like to drink a couple of wine, glasses of wine every single night. I mean, who doesn't? And she said, the fact that you are owning it and that you are owning your truth and that you are walking in this newfound light, she said, is absolutely remarkable. And so I definitely am sorry. I should have had some tissue or something, but,
No.
I've definitely seen this new woman emerge and just blossom, and I'm only want to go up from here, and I find myself that when I am not connected with a community of people that are positive, a community of people that are within the AA community, my mind tends to spiral and go back to the old Rachel, and not in the sense of drinking per se, but just negative thinking or this kind of toxic energy, and I can easily spiral quickly. And so I have to do some things like waking up in the morning and the first thing that comes out of my mouth is thank you, regardless of what my day is going to look like, and just be grateful that in that moment I'm alive and I woke up, because there was not that long ago where I didn't know if I was ever going to wake up again. And so that's kind of how I came to where I am today, per se. Before
we kind of get into your journey that's been clean now for quite a few years, let's go back to kind of when you said you had a couple of toxic relationships that kind of spiraled you into this to drinking. But I know from us speaking on the phone, it was a whole slew of things, and kind of those relationships just kind of pushed you over the edge. So I think that so often what people see are the problems, right? Like, so the problem with you was the drinking at some point. That's what people saw. But it was the things that they didn't see, and the things that they didn't kind of walk that path with you before, many years before, that they never saw. And it was just kind of like the reaction to everything that you've been through. So let's go through kind of what you've been through, what caused the drinking, because that was really, it was a cause and effect, right? There was something that caused that drinking. There was an effect of something. So let's go back into that. What was the cause of your drinking?
When I was about 6 or 7, I don't know. How old were you in kindergarten? 5, 6, roughly around that age?
I didn't go to kindergarten.
Okay. So when I was in kindergarten, I can remember like taking naps at nap time and just hearing my mother's voice in my head screaming, Rachel! Like she would call me from the other room, and it was always something like, hand me the remote control, give me, go into the refrigerator and give me a soft drink, or just all of these like crazy things that my mom would do. She was very controlling. She was very manipulative, and it was very rough on me. So I have 4 siblings total outside of myself. So 5, 3 boys and 1 sister. And she was harder on the girls than she was the boys. I can assume why that was. I don't really know. My mother's deceased now. We've never really had that conversation, other than the fact that I grew up with a lot of resentments, and mainly they were towards her. My dad absolutely loved her. He would defend her. He would, and sometimes he was so soft-hearted, my resentment started to build up to him because he wouldn't stand up to her for anything. But anything and everything that had to do with my childhood, my mom was a school teacher, and so she poured her heart into all of these other kids and didn't give me that same type of love and nurturing that I possibly needed at a very young age. My dad brought me, to dance recitals. My dad showed up for my chorus concerts. My mother never really did any of those things for me. She might have gone to the actual dance recital itself, but my dad brought me to all of my dance lessons or anything like that, practices. He was the one who would cook for the family. My mom was just, not that she was an absent parent, because, she was an educator and she wanted to make sure that our education was, a top priority, but she did pour her heart out and energy to a lot of kids in the community outside of school, whether it was Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, bitty basketball leagues, and doing a lot of stuff with kids that came from disadvantaged circumstances, And so I think that looking back at that now, the woman that I am, I'm grateful for some of those experiences, because it kind of spearheaded me into this career and this passion of helping at-risk youth. And so I had a career of that for 24 years. And so I know I go kind of going back and forth here, but I think I'm taking the good, the bad, and the ugly, and just learning from all of those experiences, and not living in this victim mentality of woe is me. And trust me, I did that for many, many, many years. And so, I kind of look back at those things and say there were lessons that were to be learned from all of those things. And so that kind of got me into being very needy in relationships, seeking love, because it was missing from a fundamental foundation standpoint from your family. And I also was a late bloomer. So when I talk about the addiction piece of the drinking, I was always also very overweight as a kid. And so getting picked on, getting ridiculed, never really dating until I got to college. I think my first date, I was, 21, 22, and just didn't really come into my own until much later in life. And so, dating was always, interesting because I was always insecure. Will they like me? Will they find that I'm pretty enough? Am I going to compete with someone who's a size 2 when I'm weighing 215 pounds? Like, just really self-conscious, and didn't have the confidence that I have now. And so going into relationships, I was just jumping from one relationship to another. They would last no longer than 6 months. And so where I'm getting to is a conversation that you and I had over the phone. Was while I was in college, there was a cute boy that I was very interested in since my freshman year. And I had lost weight. I was feeling a little bit good. And it was this false sense of confidence, not real confidence that comes from within. It was this exterior confidence because I had lost weight and I was getting the attention that I never really got before. And so we had all gone drinking. We were at a fraternity house. So this guy I was very interested in started drinking and go back to the back of the fraternity house. And before I knew it, it was the next morning, and I woke up on the bed. Clothes was, bottom half of my clothes were off. There was blood all over the sheets. And there was another guy, not the guy that led me to the back of the fraternity house, sitting on a chair. And he was tying his shoes, and I was just dumbfounded and just still drunk and disoriented, and just asked, what happened? And he said, well, I walked in the room, I found you like that, and I'm going to take you back to my friend's house, my sorority sister. So I was just kind of in disbelief. There was a lot of shame. There was a lot of guilt, a lot of uncertainty because I blacked out, which I'm not sure if people that are listening understand the difference between passing out and blacking out. And so in a state of blackout, you have drank so much that your body is still functioning. You're just not really aware of what's happening. And so passing out is when you've drank too much and you passed out and you're almost like in a comatose sleep. And, from what I was told is that I was more of a blackout state than I was at a pass out state. And so part of me had some of that guilty conscience of, well, did I ask for it? Well, maybe I deserved it. My sorority sisters had always said, don't go to the back of the fraternity house. It's not very ladylike. And mind you, I graduated from high school in 1990. So, the times back then were very different than the Me Too movement and all this and that have kind of spearheaded over the last several years. And so I went home, and I ended up contacting the guy that brought me home. And I said, can you please help me put these pieces together? And so basically what he shared with me is that, and he still claimed that he was not one of them, which I seriously doubt, since he was putting on his shoes, sitting while watching me be butt naked on the bed, that I had had sex with 2 guys that I don't remember having sex with. And I'm counting him as my third. And from that time, I just went into this downward spiral. In Lafayette, there's a place in Lafayette, Louisiana, there's a place back in college, it was called The Strip, where everybody went, and there were several bars that were all lined up. And anytime that I would go out, I would bump into these guys, and the hair on the back of the neck would stand up. My stomach would go in knots, and I would look around immediately, like, does everybody know? Did they tell people? Or were there bragging rights? Or what the hell was happening and stuff? And so for me, drinking started to become a norm where I just, drank to cope with some of the pain. And then from that also led to a lot of promiscuous activity where I just would sleep around to feel numb. I would sleep around to feel justified. I would sleep around to feel vindicated. I mean, there were so many reasons why I slept around. And the main purpose was I was lost and just still continuing to find that love in someone else when I desperately needed to find that love within. And I wasn't able to do that. Trauma is something that I think has been escalated over the last few years, emotional wellness and all of that good stuff. But back then, that wasn't something that we talked about, and women for sure didn't share that. I shared that with two people only. Both of them now are deceased. Recently, in the last year, one of them passed away, and it was weird. It just felt almost very freeing. Like because they were the only two that really knew what was going on. And after they both passed away, it was kind of like, I can really let this go, And so that's kind of where I am with that now. I'm not currently dating anyone. When I did get out of rehab, I took a year and a few months to not date a soul. Well, let me recap that. When I first got out of rehab, the toxic relationship that got me in there in the first place, I did start dating him again for 3 months, but was sober. And soon thereafter, things started spiraling again. I ended up relapsing, and I was like, what the hell? I can't do this anymore. Like, this is absolute insanity. And so from then I decided that I wasn't going to date anyone for a year and just really started working on myself and got into my very first real relationship right out of, sobriety a year and some odd months later. The interesting thing is that he didn't drink, but he still had some of those same tendencies that I was attracted to when I was in the thick of my addiction, narcissist, very self-absorbed. And he probably had his own addict issues outside of, not drinking. But he was very charming and charismatic and all of the things that I felt I wanted in a relationship. And when that ended, I haven't dated anyone since. And that's been almost 2 years now. And it's not because I'm afraid to jump into another relationship. It's because I'm still healing. And it's very hard to heal in a pandemic, in the midst of that. I got laid off from a 24-year career. My dog died. My dad died. So many things have happened to me. Let me reframe that. Some of those things didn't happen to me. They happened for me, to help me get stronger and to help me be an emotional support system for other women that are out there. I believe that I got through that, not through therapy. I would love to say that I've been going to see this amazing therapist and she taught me the tapping method and all of these different things. But for me, it was the walls of the Alcoholics Anonymous and learning how to let go of some of those regrets and resentments that were making me sick in the first place. It's kind of how I've come to this woman that you see before you today, where I'm able to freely talk about it. And it's therapeutic. Like, it's very healing to me to constantly put it out there, and rewarding in a sense that, when I'm sharing it on social media, or if I'm doing a makeup consultation with someone and I'm telling my story to that person, when they look at me or they grab my hand and say, that happened to me too, or I totally understand where you relate, or you're so brave. And it's like, I don't think that I'm brave. I just think that it's giving me this newfound sense of freedom that I've never experienced before. I don't have to be a prisoner of my past.
You've been through so much. I mean, there's been childhood trauma leading into, kind of self-doubt, self-hate, going into college where you found, almost like you said, this newfound, security and this like newfound glory in yourself, and losing weight, but that didn't actually help you. That actually, put another trauma in your path. And then, relationships. And I think all of that is so relatable. All of that is so true, right? Whether, somebody has spiraled into alcoholism or somebody's been raped or not. I think that, going outside of that, I think compounded trauma is really where we see kind of these spirals, right? Like the effects of that are alcoholism. The effects of that are, drug use and overdoses and other addictions that are out there. And I think, it's normal is a thing. The bottom line of all of it is that it's normal kind of to, if you don't know how else to cope with it, you're going to cope with something that is not healthy because you just want to let it, you just want to forget it, right? You just want to kind of disconnect from the body. You want to disconnect from your mind, disconnect from everything that is wrong inside of you. But I want to go back to kind of, you brought up the Me Too movement. And I specifically remember when I was working in California at the station, and we were just going through the Brock Turner trials. And I think that was one of the bigger cases where we saw fraternities and males and kind of how campuses deal with rape. Let's talk a little bit about that. Let's unpack that slightly, because I think, the culture is changing, but we are not anywhere where we need to be yet, where people understand the difference between actual consent and kind of this false sense of consent is where you were.
So it's interesting because when I was sharing pieces of my story at an AA meeting, I never really kind of divulged everything that was happening other than talking at it from a very high level. And the fourth step in Alcoholics Anonymous is talking a lot about resentments. And when we're kind of writing it out on paper and putting it together and piecing it out to be able to share with, someone that we trust, like a sponsor or anything like that. Part of it is, where did you own that part in the story? And I struggled with that for a long time because I was like, I curse a lot, so I'm trying.
That's fine. Listen, this is no filter, okay? You need to cuss, you cuss, okay, sweetheart?
Right.
You get it out of you.
Are you fucking kidding me? Like, I experienced this traumatic incident, and now I have to own a part of that fucking story. Like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, that's unrealistic, and I look back at it now, and it's like, owning that part of the story had nothing to do with placing blame on myself. Owning parts of that story had nothing to do with me taking responsibility for what someone else did. And in this case, 3 someone else's did. And so for me, it was like, okay, I drank a lot that night. If I were under a sound mind, more than likely, I wouldn't have put myself in that situation. And that's still not blaming myself. And I think what I hear a lot of times women talk about is, let's teach men how they're supposed to treat women. So women don't have to be afraid when they're walking in public alone, or let's teach men. And I do agree to that. But I do also believe that there is some personal responsibility that I have to own in some of those things. Like, if I was in a healthier state, if I would have been in a more, like I said, more sound mind, and I wouldn't have been drinking as much, then I probably wouldn't have put myself in those situations. That doesn't take the blame away from them. That doesn't state that I'm blaming myself for this. It just states that those were some of the lessons that I could have learned from that. And now that I've been sober for 5 years, I'm much more assertive when it comes to men, and I call them out on their bullshit if they say something that's inappropriate or stupid, or if they'll send me a stupid message and, on Facebook or whatever it is. I don't think I could have done that 4 or 5 years ago prior to getting sober. I still had to have a very Southern mentality, like a little damsel, and, we're not supposed to ruffle any feathers, and sugar and spice and everything nice and all of that good stuff. And so now I'm able to be a bit more assertive with setting boundaries, and I wasn't able to do that. So when I look at owning my part in the story, that's the part that I possibly could own. And even saying in the word possibly, I could definitely own that part, is that, if I had not been drinking and inebriated, then I more than likely would have not put myself in that situation to begin with.
I think there's a lot to be said there, though, because I think, one, you were very young, right? And I think that it does start with teaching our kids, or, my future kids, about kind of what boundaries are, right? Like, what does consent look like? And I think that it does start with teaching men about how to actually treat women. And the fact that, I go to work at 4 a.m., right? Or I go to work for 4 a.m. The other day I was walking and I saw somebody walking, I sped up, right? Like, as a woman, you speed up. As a woman, there is still that fear in you, like you get in the car and you lock the door. So yes, and in a sober mindset, I get that, right? But in a mindset, like you said, that was inebriated, you don't have that sense of right or wrong. You don't necessarily have that means to fight off. There's blame to be had for everybody, but I think really it does start with the house and having those conversations at home before anything like this happens. I do want to talk a little bit about your journey, because I think that, you brought up that you lived in the South, you grew up in the South, you're still kind of in the South, you live in Atlanta right now. So Atlanta is this great city that I adore Atlanta, but you are a very Southern state with a very progressive city, kind of like snap dab in the middle of it, right? So let's talk a little bit about kind of why you transitioned from the deep down South in Lafayette, Louisiana, to where you are right now, and kind of why that change had to happen for you as a person, for you to be able to grow.
In 1996, when I graduated from college, I started at my very first job was at a local Boys and Girls Club in Abbeville, Louisiana. And I did gang prevention. I was their unit director, as well as I worked with most of the teens in that program. And 4.5 years later, the national headquarters recruited me, and that was in 2001, and moved me to Atlanta. And I've been here pretty much ever since, with a 4-year gap. So about 27, 28 is when I moved to Atlanta. Very green, because I had just moved from Louisiana, had never left, Louisiana and those roots per se, came to Atlanta, and just fell in love with a fast-paced life. And, there was always something to do, party till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, don't get me wrong, Louisiana, I mean, you've lived there, we are a party state. We have festivals for festivals. It's just, there's a celebration for everything. And
everything.
Everything.
Including hurricanes, yes.
Including hurricanes, that's right. I know, it's insane. So coming to Atlanta, there weren't as many festivals, but I mean, there was something happening all the time, movies being filmed here, movie premieres, or, big music festivals with big name artists that were free. And it's like, you can go and party all night long. And so, I just could not get enough of that life. And then my mom got sick in 2012, 2013. And it was before I had gotten sober. And I ended up going to Buckhead Church. Andy Stanley's my pastor, love that church, but it was my first time ever going there. And I ended up sitting up in the balcony, and something just spoke to me. Laura Story was performing Blessings. I can remember just like it was yesterday. And she said, not she, but the voice I heard in my head said, "You need to go home because your mom's going home." And my mom had been sick, but she had been bedridden for a while. So like, she could still to this day be bedridden. Like, no one really knew. It's not like she took a turn for the worse or anything like that. But something in my gut just said, "Rachel, go home, make peace with your mother," because we had that tumultuous relationship. I mean, we were oil and water, we butt heads and we fought. It probably made me stronger and the fighter that I am today. And so I did. I flew home immediately. And on that Thursday that I got there, she was fine. She was laying in bed, cracking jokes. And I was just like, okay, you're pulling my leg. What are you doing? And on the Sunday before I flew home, her nurse that came every single Sunday said, "You need to contact your airline because we're going to have to call hospice." And so I ended up kissing my mom on her forehead, because she had this one tear that was falling down her cheek. She did not want to go to hospice. And I said, "Mom, I love you. It's okay. Go be with God." And she sat up and she took her last breath. And so when I tell you I'm grateful, she may not have seen me sober, but I was able to make peace with her and just kind of let some of the anger go, because it's not worth holding on to. Love people while they're here, not while they're gone. That doesn't make any sense. And so, so I ended up going home back to Atlanta. And my dad was having a hard time. He had home health care. And I'd asked my boss, I said, "I really miss family and I want to be around my dad for as long as I can." And I didn't think I was going to cry. So anyway, but it's not that it's not in my nature. Anyway.
It's okay. These are tough topics, right? Like this is normal. I mean, I'm shedding a tear while you're talking too, because and normally I'm not allowed to do this, right? So I love that I get to do that because it's so one, it's cathartic, two, it's so real, it's so human, and it's
Right.
so normal. Like, I mean, you're losing somebody, right? And you said something so beautiful in all of that, that like love people while they're here, not while they're gone.
Yeah.
Like, and it's true. Yes, you may have had a toxic relationship with your mother. You needed to, I think, I'm sure there are still things that I wish you that I'm sure that you wish you had said to her, or you wish that you had conversations with her that, unfortunately you won't have with her. So you have to make that peace on your own. But you made a step, right? You made a step and you made a stride. And from there, I think you learned kind of what was important in your life, right? And I think that that's kind of what propelled you to where you are today.
I moved back to Lafayette 2013, and my dad ended up getting ill and was admitted into a rehab facilitation that was also a nursing home. And it was a blessing in disguise, because the home health agency that he was using, the person that was treating him, also treated my mother. And so he looked at her like she was a daughter, but she ended up stealing from him. And he didn't want to press charges. He was the nicest, soft-hearted man, always wanted to do right by everyone. Probably something a lot like me in a sense, because we were always the one who wanted to do right by everyone except for ourselves. And so when he had fallen, they said, you need to go to this rehab facility that's in a nursing home. And he fell in love with the nursing home. And it just so happened that a lot of the kids that I worked with at when they were kids grew up and they were working at this nursing home. So they treated him like he was the grandfather and he was the mayor of the facility. And I remember it was in October of 2016. And it was right 2 months before I had admitted myself into the rehab facilitation. He just looked at me. He's like, I'm worried about you. And he's like, you're just not happy here. What's going on? Like he could tell there was something like really upsetting me. And I just looked terrible. My eyes were sunken in. I was green in color. Like I was pickled from the alcohol. Like I wasn't healthy at all. And he could totally sense it. I ended up going into rehab for 40 days, 40 nights. And when I ended up getting out, like I mentioned before, was still dating the guy and he cheated on me and I ended up relapsing. I had a best friend in Atlanta at the time, because even though I was living in Louisiana, I still had to come to Atlanta once a month for work because I was still employed by Boys and Girls Clubs of America's national headquarters. And so my best friend, I was drinking in front of him and he's never drank a day in his life. And he looked at me and he says, if you drink one more drink, I will never talk to you again. And I think that was kind of like the wake-up call that I needed, and a reassurance that, wow, I really do have real friends, because most of my friends were very surface and pretentious and not very real, raw, and relatable to begin with. And so after I had gotten sober again for the second time and decided that this life was not for me anymore, I ended up going back home, visiting my dad at the nursing home, and just kind of shared everything with him as much as I could without him consistently worrying about me, because he knew he'd come home for Christmas. Where's Rachel? Her car is here, but she's not there. Like no one wanted to tell him I was in rehab because he was a worry wart. He would have continued to worry about me. And so when I got out, when I got sober the second time, I finally said, look, Dad, I was in a rehab facilitation. I haven't been happy for quite some time. And it's more than just the drinking. I'm angry and I'm mad at the world. And my dad had said, Rachel, go back to Atlanta, be your own boss and don't take bullshit from anyone. He said, you just are not happy here. And you are probably happier there. So I ended up flying back, moving back to Atlanta. And have been sober ever since, and have found some really good, strong sobriety here in the city of Atlanta. And the thing that is probably the most refreshing is there's a lot of young sobriety here. And I don't know, looking back at my college years and seeing some of these kids that are 19, 20, and I shouldn't say kids, but I'm almost 50, so to me, they are kids. that are killing it in the sobriety game is absolutely inspiring to me, because I know for a fact I could not have done that at that age.
I think the thing that really pops out at me though is that you are staying sober and you went back to Atlanta, a place where you said, like, I mean, the nightlife is 24/7, right? Like you're out there, you can go out there all the time. But I think in small towns, specifically Louisiana, where I loved it there, right? I truly, I loved Lafayette, Louisiana. My time there was incredible. I met some of the most incredible people there. But I also realized the damage and the brokenness that was kind of happening behind the scenes and behind closed doors, and a lot of the people that I talked to who opened their doors to me had these horrible stories of growing up or horrible stories of things that they've experienced that people just don't talk about. And so alcohol was a coping mechanism for a lot of people, right? And a lot of people that I know who have gotten sober. And in a city like Lafayette, or in a state like Louisiana, where you've got drive-throughs going through, right? I mean, you can get daiquiris on the fly. And my brother was just like, "What are we doing? We're going to get a daiquiri? Like, we're driving through and picking up alcohol, and you can just drink it as you go." Like, yeah, that's kind of what happens. I mean, you can't drink and drive, but it happens, right? So I think, you specifically, like, you detached yourself from one culture that is very heavy. I laugh because I say that, like, the Louisiana culture is so similar to the Polish culture, because we are so saturated with alcohol. We are so saturated with kind of big parties. And so often, I know growing up Polish, we don't talk about alcoholism, even though it's rampant. Like, I mean, people are alcoholics left and right. And I mean, by 16, most people are drinking and heavily drinking. And so to say that, this is not the culture I want to continue down in, and this is not what I want to continue living in, and to separate yourself. I know for myself, it was a big deal to separate myself from my Polish culture, right? Because I had to, almost in a way, to see and experience a different side of this world, a different side of this country. And I think you did a little bit of that as well. You kind of said, for my own health, for my own my own mental health and physical health, even, you have to detach from a culture that loves you, because they love you, but was toxic to you and the person that you were in that culture.
So it's funny because a lot of my friends didn't know that I went to rehab. I mean, it was very in the moment, last minute. Muriel, who is my sister, take me to rehab. Like, I'm desperate. And within the next morning, I was there. So many people just kind of said, "Okay, she went MIA. Where is she?" They would reach out to my family and all of this and that. But I can remember getting out of rehab, and after I had broken up with the jerk that cheated on me and I had relapsed and all of that good stuff, there was a guy, because it was also right around Mardi Gras. He had asked me to go with him to a Mardi Gras ball. And I remember my heart racing, because he was someone I was always kind of interested in. But I lied to him. Like, I flat out lied and just said, "Oh, I have a work trip, I can't go," because I didn't feel strong enough that if I would have gone with him to a Mardi Gras ball and had all of these people around me that were drinking, that I would not want to drink. And so it didn't happen and come easy to me immediately, but through time, I've almost had to put up these imaginary guardrails where, I put a buffer in place where if I'm going someplace and I know that there's alcohol involved, then I'll make sure that someone there knows, and not that I need someone to be my gatekeeper by any means, but at least, someone there can look out for me, or somebody, knows, in the sense, because they don't want the bartender. And I'll give you a great example. So I just came back from Miami. I had a trip that I was planned for my career that I'm doing now. And I was there with the CEO and all of, like, some of the head people in the corporate office at dinner. And the girl sitting next to me knew that I was an alcoholic. And so the CEO had no idea. So he bought shots for everybody. And instead of me having to say, "Oh, I don't drink," which is silly, because there are a lot of people who are not alcoholics that don't drink. It's just the way that my mind constantly thinks.
Mhm.
This young person just said, "Oh, Rachel, I'll drink that for you." Or she just kind of grabbed it or gave it to somebody else. Or, I put these guardrails and these systems in place to kind of help me protect myself from going over the edge, because that lifestyle is not something that I ever really want to go back to. I don't enjoy waking up hungover. I don't enjoy waking up saying, "Oh shit, what the hell did I post on social media?" Or, did I offend somebody? Did I hurt someone's feelings, whether it was intentional or unintentional. There's consequences for all of that. And now I can live with a free, clear mind, and own if I do something in the moment, as opposed to have to kind of backtrack and figure out what did I actually do. And it's pretty amazing not to have to live like that.
It sounds almost like it's freeing to you too.
Extremely, yeah.
So Rachel, anybody who is kind of in that moment, you talk about, you looked at your sister and you were watching your niece be a mouse, right? Like, I mean, it was so pure, it was so beautiful, but it struck a chord with you, right? Like that was your turning moment. Like that was your turning moment where you just said, if I don't get the help I need, it's over for me. Like, I know that I will not live to see the next day. Sometimes people don't have those moments. Some do, some don't. Anybody struggling, anybody kind of going through what you went through, and, in that dark period, I want to say really is what it is, in that cloud of kind of despair. What is your advice to them? What is your advice when you see somebody struggling who's not sure about rehab, who's not sure about staying sober, who's not, I have friends who are sober. I have friends who are sober from whether it's heroin, cocaine, alcohol, other things, right? Like, I mean, a slew of different friends who are sober off of a ton of different things. And not all of them, like you say, I live a better life and I'm happier now. They go back to, and they say to me, Paulina, I love the life I live now, but I miss it. I miss getting high. I miss getting drunk. I miss going out and just being social in that way. What do you say to anybody who's kind of like, well, then why the hell would I give it up? Right? Mm-hmm. Like, if you still miss it after all these years, why would I give it up?
I miss it too. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I'm clean and sober and I'm a saint or an angel. Like, I absolutely miss that rush. I absolutely miss going into a bar and sitting there and from noon till 2:00 in the morning. I miss sometimes the taste of Chianti as it, goes to the back of my neck. I miss a lot of things, but I don't miss getting a DUI. I don't miss losing a lot of people who genuinely loved me. I don't miss not being able to have my mother see me sober. I don't, that there's so many things that outweighs what I really miss about it, that I'm just, I refuse to go back to that state. And here's the thing, like, I'm not above and beyond another relapse. I literally have to work this program every single day. If I, and I'm not a saint, I don't go to AA meetings every single day. I don't even go sometimes once a week. There are times where it might be a month or two before I go. But if I find myself getting very squirrely and delusional and thinking that I can go back to drinking and everything's going to be okay, I need to take myself to a meeting, because I have to have that support system and other people who can keep it real. Because this is not a lifestyle choice that anyone should want to make. And if someone is really thinking that they miss it so much that they need to go back, there's not a whole lot that anybody can do to stop them. I didn't just hit the rock bottom with my niece, and seeing her and saying that was my kind of like my final maybe rock bottom, but I've hit a lot of other rock bottoms. And what we do as alcoholics, we bring a shovel and we just keep digging a ditch and going deeper and deeper and deeper to dig ourselves out of that rock bottom until we hit the next one. And so when people relapse, it's because they just weren't finished yet, and there's not an awful lot that anyone can do other than be a support system when they need you. But at the same time, like, there are people that I know that say all the time that they probably have a drinking problem, but they are not willing to do anything about it. And that's out of my hands. Like, if I have given you some suggestions, I'm giving you some, advice or whatever it is that you're asking, and you're not willing to make any changes in your life, then I kind of have to sit back and just walk away, because I'm not going to be there to witness another train wreck, and I finally get in my life why many of my friends had to walk away. And I don't blame them. I was like you said, I was a mess. There are people that I'm never going to be able to say I'm sorry to. And the way that I'm going to have to kind of move forward is by having a kind of a living amends with them, and just making sure that every single night before I go to bed, I put myself in check and say, how did I show up today? Is there anybody that I need to make an amends to or apologize to? Did I do something that was out of character? And if I do, then I rectify that immediately. And if not, then I can go about living my next day to the best day that I possibly can. And to me, that's the best way to apologize to someone who's not willing and ready to hear it. And just being okay with, there are people that I've hurt in my past that I'm just going to have to show up every single day as the best version of myself. And if they're willing to accept that, wonderful. I have plenty of space for you in my life. But if you're not, then maybe there's some things that that person probably needs to work on themselves that is going to prohibit them from being totally free of forgiving.
I think I want to ask you as an addict, because it's, you know, I think for anybody outside, those friends or the family members that watch their loved ones kind of go through this, and they're like, I want them to get help, and they can't, and they won't, or they won't stay sober, and they keep relapsing. Walk me through kind of what that kind of feels like. You know, like, what does that actual physical addiction feel like?
Oh gosh, any given day it could feel like something completely different. It's an obsession, like this OCD on steroids that, and for me, I'm a multi addict. So I was addicted to food. I'm addicted to relationships. I was addicted to love. I was addicted to alcohol. And so putting all of those things in one basket was completely destructive. I was a time bomb waiting to explode. I can't think, I can't sleep, I can't, you know, and one thing continuously leads to another. So whether it's like the addiction to love or addiction to men, you know, my mind is constantly wondering, what are they doing? What are they thinking? Where are they? Why haven't they called me back? Checking my phone obsessively 50,000 times to see if they've called in the last 5 minutes, and doing that for a long period of time. Then knowing that I can't shut my brain off because it's this constant voice that is in my head, and you do feel crazy, would cause me to drink and to take the sleeping pills, because if I'm sleeping, then I'm not thinking. Like, that was the way my crazy mind would work. And a lot of times I wouldn't sleep when I was taking pills and drinking, because that alcohol has so much sugar in it. It was constantly keeping me up all night. You know, people that tend to say they need a glass of wine to fall asleep, sorry to tell you, but it doesn't really help you fall asleep. Actually, it really does disturb your, you know, your REM and your deep sleep that you think that you're going to get. And especially as you get older, it only adds to that and gets worse. And so for me, I was just an absolute basket case of feeling like that I'm certifiably crazy, and asking myself all the time, like, what is wrong with me? Like, there must be something really wrong with me. My old sponsor, she's moved since then, but you know, I used to tell her that all the time. Like, I would cry when I was sharing my story. I would cry when I was, you know, having a rough day, or like, how do you cope with life in general? You know, I'm so grateful that I have somebody like a sponsor to be able to go and share that with. And she looked at me and she just said, Rachel, most people, now mind you, she's not a therapist, she's not a psychiatrist or anything like that, but she said, most people that are crazy don't know that they're crazy, so to speak, you know, quote unquote crazy. You at least can own and acknowledge that there's something not right and unsettling within yourself that that needs to be fixed. Most people that have, you know, those issues don't necessarily know that. So it kind of made a lot of sense to me in that moment, and knowing that there probably are a lot of other people that are out there thinking that, wow, what is really wrong with me? You know, why can't I get my shit together? Why do I always feel like, you know, it's one catastrophe after another, and I just don't know how to handle life's challenges that keep being thrown at me? And I was falling into this victim mentality, and that's basically what it was, me acting like a victim, as opposed to really there's something wrong with me where I needed medicine to fix it. You know, you still carry the label of alcoholic, right? Because you've labeled yourself that quite a few times in this conversation. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I think from friends that I know who are in AA, they are very, like, they're proud, they own that, right? They're like, I am an alcoholic.
alcoholic, and like they've kind of overcome that, but it's like you never shed that that title and that label. Let's talk about that a little bit for you.
I'm not ashamed of being an alcoholic. I've worked hard to earn that badge because I've literally spent 40 something years of my life thinking that there was something inherently wrong with me. And there is. I'm an alcoholic, and I have to own that every single day. That, whether you want to call it a label or title or my life of who I am, it helps to kind of keep me balanced and remind me of the person I was, the person I am today, and the person who I look forward to being in the future. I share my story a lot and tell people quite often, that I'm an alcoholic, and not to get attention or anything like that. It helps keep me grounded. And anytime I can share that with someone, you just never know who you're going to help, and a lot of times when people think of alcoholics, they think of someone who drinks out of a brown paper bag, who lives under the bridge. And, take a look at me. I'm an alcoholic, and there's kind of like this, sense of security, knowing that there are other alcoholics that are out there that kind of understand me. When I go to a meeting and I listen to someone's story, especially if I've never met them before, I can kind of laugh because I resonate and I relate to that person so well. May not have happened the same issues that got us to the journey that we're on today, but some of the craziness that we feel in our head sometimes, this uncontrolled thinking and overthinking, and it's refreshing to know that I'm not alone out there. There are other people out there who completely get me and understand me and want to support me, whether they like me or not, because our first priority is to make sure that we keep someone else sober.
Rachel, I think finally I just want to kind of go back to, what are your words of advice to anybody who's either struggling with addiction right now, or a family who are struggling to get somebody to a rehab facility to get clean and sober? What are your words of advice?
I realize that Alcoholics Anonymous is not for everybody, but to find someone that you trust and to share what it is that you're experiencing and going through, and to do some research on treatment facilities. Maybe it's going to a therapist, or, trying to figure out how do you move past what it is that you're experiencing, because understanding alcohol is just a Band-Aid that is kind of covering the real problem. And how are you going to uncover that? Someone who perhaps is a family member, maybe going to an Al-Anon meeting and being a part of Al-Anon, because in my experience, what I've seen from people that have family members who are addicts, it's, either they blame themselves or they don't take responsibility for any of the issues that are happening in their family. And Al-Anon can really work you through some of those things. Al-Anon's great for that support system, but it's also good for people who are codependent and people that are, needing to navigate relationships, and not just, romantic relationships, but family relationships, and, friends relationships and so forth. So Al-Anon's another good part of that. And then there's also, these Christian groups that have Celebrate Recovery, that's more Christian based specific, that are within churches and stuff like that, that also do a 12-step program. But it really is for anyone that feels the need that Alcoholics Anonymous may not be for them, and they want to do something more along the Christian route. Just to make sure that you do your research, but also to be a support. But at the same time, don't own someone else's problem. At the end of the day, they're going to have to figure it out and fix it for themselves. And if someone is not willing to get the help, you may have to take a step back and love them from afar, because you can only lead a horse to water, but you cannot force them to drink that water. So, and that's true from my experience, when people have tried to help me so much that I ended up hurting them, where they had to walk away from me. I get it. And I truly sometimes have to do that for other people who I love as well. Take a step back and just love them from afar, because there's not going to be an awful lot that I can do for them if they're not willing to get the help that they need.
Such true words. Rachel, you have been a phenomenal guest. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you everyone for listening, for joining. Rachel, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You have a wonderful day.
You too.